Welcome, everyone. Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today I'm joined by Dr. Keira Barr, who is a functional dermatologist. In other words, she's aligned with integrative medicine principles, which is beyond astonishing for me because there's not that many of them. And even more, it gives us an opportunity to discuss one of my passions, which I'm going to let you find more about in our interview. But this is just, you've got to stay tuned for this one because it's going to be great. So welcome and thank you for joining us today, Dr. Barr.
I'm excited to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah. So how did you get interested in dermatology?
Yeah. It's funny. If you had asked me this over a decade ago, I would have just said, oh, because dermatology was so interesting. You could do medicine, you could do peds, you could do surgery, you could do pathology and all the things. So I never had to make a decision. But in full transparency, about 12 years ago, my own health started falling apart.
Oh, boy.
And
Do you want to disclose what happened?
Yeah. So as a dermatologist, it was very humbling. The focus of my career at that time was skin cancer, melanoma. My own skin started changing, and I had to diagnose myself with early melanoma.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to dive deep into that one for sure.
Yes.
Absolutely. Because actually, I'd forgotten that is one of my challenges with most dermatologists, but then I've modified that challenge and I haven't addressed this publicly. So I really look forward to hearing your journey and then we'll kind of dive deep into my new take on it.
Yeah. So through my own journey, I really discovered that there's so much about the skin that I did not appreciate and acknowledge that for most of my life probably felt very uncomfortable in my skin. And was had always been attracted to the mind-skin connection, like what it is like to live in this skin of ours. And so I think that I came to this profession through a very kind of deeper level than I initially on the surface had really appreciated when I was going through medical school, through residency. My whole perspective has changed as to why I wound up in this field in the first place.
Oh, great. How long is derm residency? Is it 3 years?
It is 1 year of internship, 3 years of derm. So medicine, and so 4 years total.
Okay, great. Yeah, so people don't know that it's not just going to medical school. You got another school afterwards, like 4 years. Typically, I think that's most of them. There are residencies of 3, but that's on the short side.
Yeah,
I had a 3-year residency, 2 years of residency and 1 year of internship. So what happened ultimately with the melanoma?
Yeah. So my whole life. So even though I'm a brunette, my father's a redhead. So I probably was not meant to spend a lot of time in the sun, but I did. As a younger person, got lots of sunburn, suntans. I actually was born with 2 birthmarks, one on each side of my face. And that at a very young age, I was bullied for those marks. Kids were
Really mean.
Kids were mean, but it's so interesting. They called me coffee stain face. So, even though kids are very cruel, they were actually quite smart because they actually are cafe au lait spots. So they actually are.
Oh, there you go.
It was milk stain, right?
They were accurate.
And so I learned at a very young age that our skin could be a source of shame and embarrassment. So I spent the majority of my young formative years trying to hide the skin of mine with sunburn, suntans, wound up with a lot of moles, a lot of freckles, a lot of sun damage. Fast forward, I'm a dermatologist, actively practicing, wearing my sunscreen and protective clothing and all that. But at that time, I was in academics, juggling career and kids. I was running ultra marathons. I didn't appreciate all the various stressors in my life that really kind of accumulated. And my body had been shouting at me with chronic pain, ignoring it. So my skin started to change, growing, changing moles. Fast forward, I find a very atypical spot that I had to diagnose as melanoma. So I'm both clinical derm and have a fellowship in dermatopathology. So I had to see my own.
Did you do your own biopsy?
I had a colleague do the biopsy, but I had the displeasure of actually looking at my skin underneath the microscope.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, why not? If you know what you're looking for, that would be the best way to do it. Because there's a lot of room for interpretation, is my understanding of pathology.
You know, they call it hedging because you don't want to make the
Yeah.
wrong decision. But with
Mhm.
pigmented lesions, especially, there is a broad range of
Mhm.
atypical appearances, and there's a lot of variation in how people interpret things for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so everything worked out okay then. You had it removed. Did you get it? Was it a deep excision?
Thankfully, it was a wide local excision, but because I knew what to look for, right? I always tell everyone to party in their birthday suit on the date of their birthday. So basically, every month, check your skin so when new or growing changing lesions are popping up. So I had been doing that, was able to catch it early, had it excised, but that was the tip of the iceberg. So then I
Mhm.
started experiencing hormonal issues and gut issues. And it really led me down this pathway of integrative medicine, functional medicine, taking lots
Mhm.
of different supplements, trying different plans and protocols, and nothing was really making an impact until I stumbled into mind body medicine. And then it really all started to
Wow.
make sense that it was chronic and ultimately traumatic stress in all its many forms that really had changed my physiology in a way that manifested itself in all of these different symptoms and conditions that I was experiencing. So that really led me into what I'm doing now.
So I have another question for you.
Yes.
Um, you said you're a marathoner, so and really aligned with applying principles of diet, health, style, lifestyle to optimize your health. So there was a strong push in the late teens, 2000 teens, for a low carb keto type diet. My guess is that you were engaging in that. I don't know. I've never met you before today. I've never really read about your biography, so I don't know. So I'm just guessing.
I experimented with that. I tried paleo, I tried more of a keto, I tried all the things in an effort to try and heal myself. And I found that actually very low carb was not as beneficial to my physiology. I felt really drained too much of the time to continue on a very low carb diet.
Well, congratulations on being open and curious and sensitive enough to listen to your body to tell you the truth, because it did. Do you know why you felt that way? Have you figured that out?
I probably wasn't balancing as much protein and all the macronutrients. Certainly wasn't optimizing my sleep as much as I could. I mean, we always talk about beauty sleep, but it beauty sleep is real in the sense of skin health,
Mm-hmm.
for sure,
Absolutely. Sure.
overall health,
Yeah.
but for skin health. So I think there were just probably some gaps in how I was implementing that experiment, and it definitely was an experiment for sure.
No, I think you're being overly harsh on yourself. It's much simpler, actually, much simpler. And it ties into your passion about using mindfulness and meditation to optimize skin health.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, one of the most anti mindfulness, emotional relaxation exercises you can engage in is low carb. And you may not be aware of it, but this is something I've been studying quite recently. And it's a core of my new book called Your Guide to Cellular Health. So essentially, when you have low carb, carbohydrates are the ideal fuel for your mitochondria. And most people in the world, what's considered healthy today, healthy, optimal healthy, is they produce their, you probably know this, your weight and body weight in ATP every day. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Mm.
But that's not what the average person produces. The average person produces a third of their body weight. So in other words, two-thirds, they're down two-thirds. And that pales into comparison with what our ancient ancestors did, which was 200% of the body weight. Double their body weight, they would make ATP every day. Why could almost everyone do that? Because we were not swimming in a sea of toxic soup. All these environmental toxins that are impossible to avoid. Impossible. So that brings almost everyone down. Uh, so anyway, just to set the bar, you're not making enough cellular energy. You might have been at a third. You might have been, if you were really good, at 50%. So you were low to begin with. And then when you have low carb, because that's the carbs are what your mitochondria require. If you don't give them that fuel, you need a minimum of 250 grams a day. And if you're working out like you were, maybe 350, 400, and you were probably doing 50. So your body requires that. It's going to get it if it can, almost in any way, unless you're in ketones, and it doesn't need a little bit less. But the connection here to the mindfulness is that it secretes that hormone cortisol that you're concerned about. The cortisol levels go through the roof, as do the adrenaline. They're stress hormones. They cause glucagon release. They catalyze the release of amino acids from your muscles, so you get sarcopenic, and it's a very inefficient way to create the glucose that your body needs, and it just causes more stress. It's one of the most stressful things you can do is low carb.
Yeah, I found that to be true. And it's so interesting, this having diagnosed with early melanoma, that was the premise for my book, The Skin Whisperer, of like, how can we cultivate stress resilience from the inside out as well as the outside in, and looking at different dietary, and it wasn't so much the style of eating, like carb or this, it was really in terms of bringing that mindfulness in of why am I eating in the first place? Am I trying to, soothe some emotion, or how I am eating in terms of slowing down and chewing your food? And we had lived in Okinawa for a little while. My daughter was actually born over there. And so this concept of mindful eating and Hari Hachibu, not overstuffing oneself, really became more of my approach, rather than being dogmatic about a certain diet or protocol for eating. And that really served me in a much better way.
Yeah, I think emotional components are really helpful, important, but from my perspective and experience, is mostly related to emotional traumas that aren't properly reconciled.
Yes.
But when you're talking about stressing and relaxing, your body requires a certain amount of energy. You're not getting it. I don't care what you're thinking or believing. You need fuel. You have to have fuel. It's just like a car. I don't care if it's a multi-million-dollar hypercar. If you don't give it fuel, it's not going to go very fast or far at all. In your body's no difference. It's far more sophisticated than a very multi-million-dollar car. So you got to have that. So I think we're in agreement on that. Would you say that?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I would just encourage, you got to get enough carbs. And interesting, you mentioned you're at Okinawa. Most of the Asians eat a large amount of rice. Was that your experience when you were there?
It was.
Okay. Can I tell you something about rice?
Absolutely. Tell me.
It is probably the single best carbohydrate other than pure dextrose to give people. White rice, not brown. It's a massive difference. It's the difference between night and day. Brown rice will not work. It has to be white rice. Ideally organic and arsenic free. Right. That's a little bit more challenging. But white rice it's a glucose polymer with no fiber and no linoleic acid. We're going to talk about linoleic acid in a minute. So that's probably one of the reasons it would be considered a longevity haven, because they had a good source of fuel, probably one of the finest in the world. And they were probably getting 200-300 grams of carbs a day from the rice. And I always wondered, before I understood this, how could these people eat all this rice and be so healthy? It made no sense to me. Now I know.
Well, also, they had that, the bitter melon, the Goya fruit, right? That is supposed to secret to longevity, and then the freshness of the vegetables and the food.
Absolutely.
And again, it was the approach to eating. It was a very social, communal experience, which for many of us has gone by the wayside, right? We're rushing.
I couldn't agree more. That is a big part. Ideally, you should eat your meals with family and friends. That's an ideal, and you're socializing. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I would certainly applaud those efforts to do that. Because that's a big part of life. That's a big part of life. Unfortunately, almost everyone is consuming the wrong foods. And I assert that there is a massive importance in choosing the right foods. But then once you've chosen it, it's best to eat with family and friends. There's no question.
Yeah.
So I want to pivot to your earlier assertion that you felt were particularly susceptible because of your ancestry. And you had light skin because your father, I believe, was a redhead, you said? Yeah. So that's an adaptive process, because the people who live further north, they don't get as much sun exposure. There's much less of it. So the skin has to be more open to it, as opposed to someone who's from Africa. They get it all year round. So that's protective and adaptive, and you don't make as much melanin. And I was long opposed to the traditional derm perspective or standards that really strongly encourage, and that's being kind. In certain countries like Australia, it's like prohibited people from going to the sun. I contend that sun exposure is one of the healthiest things that you can possibly, humans were designed to have. And if you don't get it, you will be sick. But that was my position for 2 decades. I changed that position in the last few months. And I actually just narrowly was able to put it in my new book because I think that was a radical difference. And I suspect that, and I don't know if you've encountered this, but I'm confident, there's definitely almost no doubt in my mind that the real cause of melanoma and all skin cancers, not just melanoma, but basal cell and squamous cell, and pretty much all other cancers, it's maybe not the primary, but it's certainly a big role, if not the most significant, would be the amount of omega-6 fat in your diet. Mm. And it's the specific fatty acid is linoleic acid. There are others, but that's the primary one. And when it's exposed to the sun, it's a very perishable. It's got 2 double bonds, and it's easily oxidized. And when it's oxidized, it's metabolized into a product called oxalates, which is short for oxidative linoleic acid metabolites. And these just destroy your cell membranes, your DNA, and your mitochondria, and your enzymes and proteins. And they destroy your biology. And when you have a lot of fat, the average person has 10 times as much as they're supposed to, and it's transported to the subcutaneous fat under your tissue. And when the UV hits it, it's off to the races. And it's doing that. So you could have the same. And I don't know if have you adopted in your pursuit of natural medicine encountered the importance of avoiding vegetable oils?
I have.
Okay. What's your conclusion on that, Ben?
I have to name that nutrition is, I haven't dove deep into literature. I know that, I think my position on that is I'm not a big fan of demonizing any food groups. There are some, obviously, that we know that are not healthful or as healthful.
We're not. Wait, you might be surprised. Which food groups are those? Let's go into that.
Things like when people are talking about seed oils or vegetable oils, or at one point it was carbs were bad, and other, the pendulum swings in many directions. And
it has, there's no question.
So yeah. I guess I'm of the mindset of, we know what we know now, and we go with that information until we learn differently. And we can pivot, just like you said that you've pivoted. And in terms of skin cancer, it's never just the one thing. I do think that how we nourish our bodies is very, very important in terms of stress resiliency. But in terms of the literature on skin cancer, and I've presented this at the American Academy of Dermatology, chronic and traumatic stress does play a role in all cancers, but specifically in skin cancer in the biology life cycle. And they've shown that childhood adverse events coupled with stress in adulthood most definitely plays a role in tumor formation, progression, metastasis, response to treatment. And what contributes to stress includes how we are nourishing our body, how we are sleeping, how we are moving, how we are spending our time, and not being able to necessarily process and metabolize the emotional experiences and traumatic experiences that we may have had at some point in our life. So I'm always hesitant just to point the finger at just the one thing.
Yeah, I think in general it's a good position, but I think you have not examined the literature. If you did, you might have a different perspective. So, and I understand that. But the other concern, would you agree that the emotional stress that you just identified is in many ways not much different than the physical stress from eating low carb? It's because it's the same mechanism. It's high cortisol.
All of these things will affect our physiology. So there's something called the NICE network, right? The nervous system, immune system, cutaneous, endocrine, they're all interconnected with kind of like our nervous system being command central. If that domino starts to fall down, how the function of all those other systems is impacted. This is so yes, they are all stressors in various different forms, and they have the same end result, is a dysregulation of our cortisol production and levels. And so that will impact your melatonin and affect your sleep. That'll affect how you digest your food and going down
Yeah,
gut motility, all the things, right? It's a cascade
right.
effect.
Yeah, because you could be eating 500 grams of carbs and have psycho-emotional stressors that would still cause the same symptoms. But I contend that you could have the other thing, that you could be have no emotional stress and having 50 grams of carbs and experience the same symptoms.
I don't disagree. I think stress in all its
Yeah,
form can have a significant impact on our physiology, for sure.
yeah. Okay, so let's pivot back to the fat. I suspect that you are in agreement that that processed foods, let alone ultra processed foods, are probably something we should avoid. I mean, there's very little disagreement in even the most rigid conventional physicians. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay. So it would be hard to identify a more ultra processed food than vegetable oils. The amount of linoleic acid that, if you look at historical records, is well under 2% of total daily calories. 2%. Now we're, and maybe under 5 grams a day if you could just do it quantitatively, and maybe even lower. I personally have about 3 grams of linoleic acid a day, and I would agree that the jury's not out. Is it excess linoleic acid, or is it the processing, the ultra processing, more precisely, of the food that is more a result? I contend it's probably elements of both, but the science isn't proven. It's not definitive at this point, from my perspective.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, if people are eating 600% more of this fat, and maybe in many cases it's the majority of the fat that they consume in their diet, it's hard. And this is maybe one of the biggest macronutrients that couldn't have some massive impact. That one of the most highly processed foods, ultra processed foods on the planet, is a significant percentage of daily calories. And I contend, and I can identify the mechanism, that it's a mitochondrial poison, an absolute mitochondrial poison, destroys mitochondrial function. And it does it by increasing, interesting, the same way that EMF and estrogen does. It increases intracellular calcium concentration, which then reflexly triggers superoxide and nitric oxide inside the cell, which instantly combine to form peroxynitrite, a reactive nitrogen species, which does the damage. It's the high peroxynitrite levels that ultimately are the destroyer of health, that are catalyzed by these mitochondrial poisons. And when you lower mitochondrial function and energy, your body cannot repair and regenerate. It just loses the ability because it requires energy. It absolutely requires energy. And the mitochondria are some of the most important organelles in the body. So anyway, that's my spiel on and I contend that and even challenge you for this experiment. It takes about 2 to 3 months, certainly 6. In 6 months, it'll be night and day difference. That you go off of all seed oils, and even linoleic acid. So there's a lot of other foods like almonds, like nuts and seeds, that clearly are not pasteurized in any way, shape, or form. Yet still, in the context of someone who has 600% more of this fat in their body than they're designed to have, could be problematic. And I argue that they are. So even go off of all the seeds and nuts, and pretty much get well under 2% of your diet as linoleic acid, and you can easily do that with nutrient analysis. I would challenge you. I would almost wager a 10, maybe even 100-to-1 bet that you could go out and not get sunburn. And you could prove it yourself, because ultimately, and this is what. So I've changed my. Remember, I said I believed everyone should be in the sun. Right. I don't believe that now. I absolutely do not believe that. I think because of the input of linoleic acid, I think most everyone, maybe 99% of the people, should not have solar noon sun exposure because they have high linoleic acid. And you combine UV from high solar noon sun exposure, and that linoleic acid, it's a prescription. It's for catastrophe. You are going to increase photoaging, wrinkling, and your risk of skin cancer, hands down. So I do not recommend it anymore unless you've been on a fast for at least 4 months, preferably 6, because these fats stay in your tissues for years. They're not like eating sugar and it's gone up and down in hours. This is there for years. So at least 6 months, and then toe in the water, go out and look for sunburn. Because if you have any bad sunburn, you overdosed on sun. You should not have sunburn pretty much ever. Like even if you weren't on linoleic acid for years and you go down to the solar tropics and you've been in New Hampshire or something for all the winter, you're going to get burned because that's too much. You have to build up a tolerance to it. But normal experiences, you shouldn't get burned. I really contend that. And I'll bet you would, if you're willing to try that, I think you would be very surprised.
Yeah. Well, I'm always open to trying things, and
Yeah, I thought you would, which is why I mentioned it.
And also, right, again, I do think if you're still not sleeping well, if there's,
Oh yes, no question. Those are those.
it's
Yeah.
hard to get rid of all of those things. And I think, again, it's never just the one thing. If we
Well,
should,
just change one variable. Stop the seed oil. Do everything else the same,
yeah,
and then go out in the sun again. See what happens.
yeah,
Because you can't discount that those variables you said are important, no question. But if you only change one variable, then you can make an assessment, which is hard to do, but you can get close to it. Not make any radical diet changes or exercise or any other interventions that you might choose to do in that 6-month period.
right. It would be interesting though if you could measure in terms of, to your point of that the seed oils, linoleic acid is affecting cortisol levels, and to be able to track that, because again, there's.
Well, I didn't suggest it was affecting cortisol levels. They don't, as far as I know. It's the low carb that affects the cortisol.
I see.
Yeah, the seed oils don't. They do poison the mitochondria, and I am developing an assay for that. We're using, I don't know if you've studied mitochondrial function, but the gold standard in the research labs is an instrument called the seahorse. I don't know if you've heard of that before. But I've got a seahorse, and we're actually developing assays to measure macrophages, live macrophages that we preserve at 100, or I'm sorry, 300 degrees below zero. It's minus 86 centigrade, whatever. So it's minus 180 or somewhere in that degrees Fahrenheit. So it freezes it. It's a cold freezer, and they can stay that state for years, and you thaw them out properly, and then you can perform tests on them. And we're going to measure lots of different things, and basically mitochondrial function when you are exposed to these mitochondrial poisons, and then when you're off of the poisons, see what happens. So no one's done this before, but it needs to be done.
Is that?
I'm sorry?
So would you be measuring essentially oxidative stress?
Indirectly, you're measuring directly mitochondrial function, which is the golden ring that is essentially unavailable to commercial scale. There are labs that do this, but it takes thousands of dollars and pretty much a full day in the lab to do it. So no one's figured out how to scale this commercially. So I've done some research to do that, to innovate and not only reduce the price, but the time down to hopefully under $100 and make it widely available. Because there is a need for this. We just can't be guessing and making these speculative statements without some type of proof.
Yeah. I just think that with sun exposure, I do. I think it is complex in terms of.
It is complex, but you can identify the variables and you can tease them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think there are a lot.
So, and you can get a clue, and I challenge anyone watching this to do this, and also warn you for the first time, because I've never said this publicly, that you should not be in the sun unless you've been fasting off of seed oils for 6 months. It's dangerous. You will get hurt.
Well,
I mean, at least not in the sun at solar noon. You can definitely go out early in the morning, later in the afternoon. That is fine, and you should definitely do that. But just, somewhere between 2 hours on either side of the solar noon, which is 1 o'clock in the summer and obviously 12 in the winter. Unless you're in the tropics, then it's 12 all year round.
Yeah, I think, there are certain conditions as well. If people struggle with photosensitive conditions, or if they're on certain medications as well, you have to be more mindful. But I think it's really important that people always get on dermatologists for saying, we never want you in the sun. But I think it is important, as you said earlier.
Well, you're the rare dermatologist that said that.
I'm sorry?
You're the rare dermatologist. I've never heard a dermatologist say, so go in the sun. So you're the first I've heard say that.
Well, I think it's really important in terms of regulating our natural rhythms to get early morning sun.
Yeah.
All of these things, but you have to be sun savvy, sun smart, because skin cancer, most people may not.
It's real. It's the most common skin cancer. The most common cancer.
That's exactly right. There's more new cases of skin cancer in the United States, and actually Canada. Skin cancer is also the most common, more prevalent cancers combined. And so we often don't think about it because it's easily managed in terms of surgery and such, but it can have a significant impact, especially because it does occur on exposed areas. And this is, again, where that mental emotional piece comes in, because those, socialized as women, and scars, and even men as well. It can impact how we see ourselves, our self-image, which also can
Mhm.
add to stress and strain and any of the conditions that people have beyond just skin issues, right? Stress causes flares. Flares cause stress. It becomes a vicious cycle. So, from my perspective, you may study very, very scientific with the mitochondria and testing. For me, I've shifted away from a lot of testing to focus more on how it feels to live in the skin of ours and how that impacts the physiology, really focusing on that mind skin connection, nervous system regulation, and the impact of chronic and traumatic stress that for too long has been overlooked. Psychodermatology is a relatively new field in dermatology, about 40 years, but we've known for so much longer than that, eons, the connection between our mental health and our skin, simply because the brain and the skin are embryologically derived from the same layer of tissue, right? They're communicating with each other all the time.
Yeah. So a few things. You had said that the skin cancer was on areas that are exposed to the sun. That's only true for basal cell and squamous. It's not true for not for
That is
melanoma.
true. That is true. But
Yeah.
the majority, the most
So
common skin cancer is basal cell, followed by squamous cell. Melanoma,
100%, but they're typically not in non-sun exposed areas.
so melanoma can occur where the sun does not shine, absolutely, and
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
fingernails, toenails, bottoms of the feet. Melanoma is a very interesting, has a very interesting biology, but the most common skin cancers that people will encounter, the basal cell and squamous cell, are predominantly on sun.
Which are also typically the most benign. And they don't kill many people a year. I think it's in the tens of thousands, as opposed to the other.
Right. The metastatic rate for basal cell carcinoma is less than 1%.
Yeah. So it's not for melanoma. What is it for melanoma? It's a lot higher. Is it over 50%?
I don't know if it's quite that high, but it depends on the type of melanoma as
Mhm.
well, and what it looks like at diagnosis, the number of metastases, the mitotic figures on histology, and all of that. And there's the staging criteria. But I think it's really important. Most people don't consider their skin more than this glorified canvas that we put clothes and makeup on. And unfortunately, the beauty industry and
Yeah.
our conditioning has led us to believe that. But your skin is this living, breathing organ. It's an endocrine organ. It
Hmm.
really can give you so much information about what's happening beneath the surface. So to your point of diet and nutrition and the seed oils, like the color, the turgor, the texture, what shows up on your skin
Hmm.
can just give you so much information. And rather than looking at your skin as a problem to be fixed, quote unquote, it's
Hmm.
really an invitation to get so curious about, yeah, what might be the one variable that I can change? How can I support myself to live and feel better just by getting really curious about what's showing up on my skin?
Okay, I want to pivot back to the nutrition again because that's my passion, of
Okay.
course. I've studied it for 5 decades, and provide you with an argument to reconsider the importance of this because I don't disagree with the psycho-emotional component. I'm not disagreeing with it at all, but that's in addition to nutrition. And I'll just walk you through this. So you talked about the mind and the brain. So you know the percentage of body weight the brain composes. What percent of the brain body weight is the brain?
Body weight of the brain. Isn't that like
No, the weight of the brain. What is that percentage of total
maybe
body weight?
the human brain weighs 8 pounds, right?
Well, but what? Yeah, it's about 2%
Yeah.
essentially, 2%. But yet, I'm sure you've heard this before. It consumes 20% of the energy,
Hmm.
the body's energy.
Yes.
So, and this you see this all the time. I'm sure you've seen it clinically too if you pay attention to it. If you're not getting enough energy, your brain's not going to work well.
Hmm.
So it's going to be really difficult, if not almost impossible, to implement some of the strategies you're recommending and encouraging. And I'm not disagreeing with those strategies at all. I'm just seeking to underline the importance of fueling your brain properly so you can do this. And then also supplying your body with the resources to compensate for all the damage that you have no control over. No control over these environmental poisons that are around. the air you breathe, the plastics that you're exposed to, that are in the food that you eat. Just can't be done.
Yeah. But I would also, on the other side of that, they come
Mhm.
to me because they've tried all the diets, they've tried the supplements, they've tried changing things. And you cannot supplement or diet your way out of the chronic and traumatic stress that you have encountered, and that is essentially stored in your body and your physiology. So I am a true believer that it's a both and. I think
Well,
one with
I would counter that that's not a double-blind trial. So yes, just do we attempting to do that because almost no one understands how to implement this. And I'm not, I have identified some strategies that have never been identified in medicine before on how to do that. But I would contend that if you did a blind control of that, but optimal carbohydrate heavy diet, the right carbs, because it's not just carbs. I'm not, if you eat as I said, there's a world between brown rice and white rice, or like cassava, which is one of the worst starches for most people because it's loaded with oxalates. So if you did that, then I would believe it. But when people are like most people that are eating healthy, that they view that's vegetarian and low carb, which is not going to produce the energy they need. So you're actually making the problem worse, not better, by eating a healthy diet.
right.
So it all goes into the specifics of what your identification of that strategy is. So it's a long, complex thing. We're not going to solve it today, but I'm just offering things to
Yeah.
consider, and especially for you, just to do it yourself. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to anyone. Listen to your body, the ultimate arbiter of truth for you and no one else. Go off of the seed oils. I don't think there's any living physician who has as critical thinking skills left that would disagree that it's not wise to eat ultra processed foods. That's universally accepted. So there's no harm in going off of ultra processed foods. I'm saying just stick to the seed oils. That is not a controversial opinion, but it might be controversial to speculate that it could be the primary cause of cancer. That is
Mm.
controversial, and I think I have good proof for it. But anyway, that's all I'm offering to consider. So I want to pivot now to a rash.
Okay.
Now, because dermatologists are good. I actually, I've practiced family medicine for a long time, and I was actually pretty good with derm. I actually enjoyed derm a lot. I took pride in my ability to diagnose and help people with their derm problems. And which is why I was particularly distraught when it was 2009. Yeah, 15 years ago, I came down with a rash. Not just any rash. This was a rash that was hard nodules that had intense pruritus. So much so that I would dread having to go to sleep at night. Dread it. Because you could not relieve this rash with anything. Steroid creams, all the natural therapies on person, everything failed. And I had that rash up until just this year. Struggled with it for 15 years. And I said I would give someone tens of thousands of dollars so they could diagnose for this rash for me and fix it. And I saw many dermatologists, and all of them failed to do it. So have you ever encountered rashes like that? Now I know what it is, so I'm not seeking free advice here because I know what it is and it's treated now. It's not there anymore.
Yeah. No,
I just wanted to dialogue about this because I have personal deep experience like you've had with your melanoma.
the first thoughts that go through my head, I'm so fascinated. I see this not infrequently.
Yes. Wait, we just stop there. That is classic medical double speak nonsense. And I'm not suggesting that you're doing this intentionally, but that's what we're taught to use double negatives to mean something positive. Not infrequently should be. I frequently see this, but not infrequently makes you look smarter. And you didn't do it. You were trained to do that because I do the same thing, but I'm trying to train myself out of that.
Words matter. One of my favorite professors always said that, and it's so funny. You don't even necessarily you say you don't
Right.
necessarily notice it. But my first thought when you were sharing your experience was, what was happening in your life at the time that it came, that this started,
Mhm.
and what?
Yeah, I went down that rabbit hole too because I was in a relationship at the time that was just devastating bad. So that could have been a trigger, no question, no question.
And because it's not just what was happening in that moment, right? Triggering things that go way back, right?
Mhm.
All of us have primary basic needs: love, respect, protection. And
Mhm.
our
Mhm.
skin tells a story all the time. Sometimes it speaks for us, the mind suppresses, but the skin expresses. And
Mhm.
it can oftentimes, when skin problems are not responding to what you would expect them to respond to, antibiotics, biologics, creams, all of the things, we have to go beneath the surface. And that's where the mental and emotional component does play such a significant role, because it often touches into the parts of ourselves that we've had to hide away, needs that were not met. I can't speak to your experience, but I've recently had a client come to me and she was struggling with chronic hives. And what's very interesting is that there was a recent paper that came out about chronic urticaria, which is the medical term for
Mhm.
hives, and childhood trauma. And so she was sharing that this condition, it was so itchy, she couldn't sleep at night. It was driving her crazy. It wasn't responding to anything. And so immediately we start on the surface, but I ask her, tell me a little bit more. What's been happening? And she shared that she is stepping into, she wants to be stepping into a new career, but her
Mhm.
friends and her family and her community aren't supporting her. So she doesn't feel heard. She doesn't feel validated. She doesn't feel seen. So isn't it so interesting that her skin essentially is shouting, it is screaming, it is saying, give me attention, look at me. And
Mhm.
it isn't always so simple, but as we continue to work together and kind of peel back the layers of where this actually started, the, the outbreaks became fewer, further between, and essentially was able to bring her more ease, more calm, and skin resolution. And so I do think,
Without any topicals, just your.
without any topicals, in the interim, she was still, for symptomatic relief, antihistamines and such, but they hadn't really
Sure.
been helping before. So I
Mhm.
do think there are situations where a lot of times there's a hereditary component, there's an environmental component, including the foods that we eat. And the emotional component may be the smallest, but it can be the linchpin and the tipping point
Mhm.
for so many
Mhm. Mhm.
people. And unfortunately, in traditional medicine, we often gloss over that. That doesn't get the attention. And people struggle
Yeah.
unnecessarily for a really long time. So my
Yeah.
mission is to help people change.
Yeah, it's your passion, obviously, and I applaud you for that. That's important. You cannot make an argument not to do that.
Mhm.
I would just encourage you to consider to do the whole picture because it's synergy. You're going to get better results for the same amount of effort if you have cellular energy.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. For me, it's always about a
Yeah.
both and. The problem is
Yeah.
the and of the mental emotional has been left out of the
Yeah.
conversation for way too
Uh,
long.
and you know why. We both know why, because that's not reimbursed at a high rate. It's difficult to assess, and there's no way, that's not taught in medical school other than refer them to psychologists or psychiatrists, which typically don't have good tools to use and doesn't resolve it. So, there's a legitimate reason to dismiss it
Hmm.
most of the time, but this doesn't justify that at all.
Right. Absolutely. And in
I,
traditional psychology and psychology, it's mostly talk therapy and prescriptions.
right,
We know
right,
from the
absolutely.
research, especially from colleagues like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Gabor Mate, looking at even the brain scans, that we know that our thinking brain goes offline, and a lot of these memories are stored as body memories, which is why
Mhm.
I focus on a body oriented or somatic approach, because
Yeah.
really a top down and bottom up approach, so that we can really process and metabolize the things that have been stuck.
So is your this approach, are there any specific tools used other than talking, like any techniques or approaches that have a name?
Yeah, so we do a lot of somatic tracking of sensation in the body, various forms of breath work, visualization, meditation, movement. A lot of
Hmm.
it can be done, right? We like to overanalyze and talk our way out of things, but unfortunately, we talk
Hmm.
ourselves in circles. So to your point, your body is always going to offer you the information in terms of an
Hmm.
energy shift, an ache or a pain, and we work with the sensations that are present, because often they give us clues as to how to support someone to work through a tough time just based on the sensations that they're experiencing.
And what type of movement do you recommend?
So it really depends. A lot of times it's, for instance, if you were I've had individuals who, as kids, they were abused, right? They
Mhm.
never got to say no. So some of the simple movements is just the act of being able to create boundaries and say no. So it's our bodies are actually making motions and gestures all the time. The opportunity is
Mhm.
to slow it down to see what is actually being offered in this moment. So sometimes
Mhm.
it's just an exaggeration of a movement that's already being made. It's really, it sounds very simple, and in many beautiful ways, it is very simple, but it's incredibly powerful and incredibly healing. And it's certainly not anything that we were taught in medical school.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. I recommend one movement, and it could actually use as an example to illustrate the principle that I think you have to have these priorities in sequence, because if you've I don't know if you're in private practice, but if you are or run a business, anyone knows that it's not so much what you do, it's a sequence that really is important. If you do it out of sequence, it doesn't work. It doesn't work well at all.
Yeah.
So, and the sequence here for the movement is that we were all designed to walk. I mean, historically, and if you are out in the gym lifting weights really heavy 5 times a week and you're not walking, engaged in some type of walking activity, I contend that you need to reevaluate that and start your walking first. And after you've got your walking in, then consider some resistance movement, because it's good, but it's not better than walking,
Mhm.
which we're designed to do. So that's, and I think that we all need ideally about an hour a day. And the beautiful thing about walking, it doesn't have to be done all at once. In fact, it's better if you break it up in the day, much better, because we should be moving all day long, not just an hour. I'm totally guilty of that, because I'm typically at my desk all day and I go out for an hour walk in the afternoon at the sun. But other than that, I'm not out that much.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in terms of movement is medicine. And
Yes.
so for every person, it may look a little bit different. Walking is one of my favorites because it's
Yeah.
accessible and get
Yeah. It doesn't cost a
out,
lot.
right? We can get outside and look at nature and just like
Yeah. Meditate.
meditate. It is medicine. And if you can do that several times a day,
Yeah, I
create
do.
that
Yeah.
break, it would be wonderful. But
Yeah, so we're in complete agreement. Complete agreement. I think it is movement. I put it at number 2 or 3 in my sequence. That you've got to get that in. You got to get it in. So I want to pivot back to this rash
yeah,
again, and because I had considered it. Have you seen a rash like that before? Other than that's not urticaria. It's these hard nodules that get indurated, and
Fragilaris.
that's what it is. That's what I died. Exactly what it is. You are a smart dermatologist, because I thought 3 or 4 of them, and no one ever gave me that diagnosis. No one. But you're a pathologist, so you have an unfair advantage. It's prurigo
Just
nodularis.
based
So
on
would
description,
you?
I could guess what it was.
You're smart as can be. You're smart as a whip. No, you are. I'm telling you. I saw three or 4 good dermatologists, and none of them figured it out. Not one. Congratulations, congratulations. I'm very proud of you. That's good.
Thank you.
So now, let me just. So now, almost everyone listening to us, oh, they're talking Latin. You're right, we're talking Latin, but we didn't make it up. But let me translate that for you. Prurigo means itchy, and nodularis means nodule. It's an itchy nodule, nothing more. They just got to make a fancy name for it to make you think that they're smart, right? That's all it is. So don't get intimidated by the language, because it doesn't mean squat. So anyway, just a few months ago, I figured out what the cause was.
Tell me.
I yeah, this has not been identified. I'm going to write a paper on this, because I know what in my case at least, and I think I speculate, it's not been proven. It's just pure speculation at this point. I think it's the cause for all. It's essentially an excess of oxalates in your body. So if you eat a lot of oxalates, foods with oxalates, and people don't eat oxalates by themselves. There's foods that are very high in oxalates, like spinach and almonds and other foods. You can just look it up. It's real. There's a woman, Sally Norton, who's done extensive work in this, and there's a lot of complexity to it, because it's related to your diet. And there's anaerobic bacteria in your body, obligate anaerobes, that survive without oxygen. If they're exposed to oxygen, they die. And one of the problems with these mitochondrial poisons I referenced earlier is they destroy your body's ability to keep a low oxygen tension in your colon. And if that happens, that's one of the main reasons of having a decreased cellular energy is you keep these organisms disappear. They're gone. And one of the main ones is oxalobacter, which digests oxalates. So if you're not digesting them in your colon, they're actually health foods. These oxalates are helpful if you have the bacteria to digest them. If you don't, they're really bad. So these oxalates, I don't know, it's actually, the chemical name is dicarboxylic acid, and it's two CO2 molecules put together. So they're actually very healthy, because CO2 is a healthy molecule in your body. Your body needs it. And if those bacteria digest it, it actually improves your colon health. But if they can't, it's a poison. Your body wants to excrete it. These really sharp crystals, they're the main reasons for kidney stones, right? Calcium oxalate stones. But it causes a lot of other problems. And it is the cause of prurigo nodularis, I contend. And the reason, because I developed a solution for this that I can't disclose because I have a patent for it, and it's in the process of being filed. So I've used this topical application, and all the induration, the redness, the swelling, and the inflammation went down. And I was able to see that it wasn't some random scattered nodule like you would think it is, and it appears to be, but actually it was a hair follicle. It was a hair follicle that had it got grown and big, and it looked like it was urticaria, which is random. There's no physiological or I think not physiological, anatomical correlation to urticaria. It's just random. As far as I know, you may know better. You're the dermatopathologist, I'm not. But I think it's random. And prurigo nodularis looks like that, but essentially it's this swollen, indurated hair follicle. And I contend that the body attempts to get rid of it. It has two routes of administration, the kidney and the sweat. And so it sends it to the hair follicles in an attempt to remove it from the body. And the hair follicles can handle the load, and they get clogged, and then they activate these cytokines. And that causes this whole cascade of events that destroys the system. So, that was my journey with prurigo nodularis, and it's resolved. I'll never get it again.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because it can be a very challenging.
Yeah, people commit suicide from this thing. They do.
But oftentimes, and I'm curious if it appeared, because typically with prurigo nodularis, people are rubbing and scratching the skin, and they're.
Oh yeah, because it's such the itching is so intense. I mean, it's like nothing you've ever experienced in life. It really is a form of torture.
Yeah. So the nodules are secondary to the habit and the behavior of the rubbing and the scratching. What I'm hearing you say, for you, it sounds like you're contending that it was your consumption of oxalates during that period of your life that was the night.
Well, I'm not dismissing that there weren't underlying contributing emotional factors. Yeah. No disagreement there. Absolutely, probably was. No question. Yeah. But still, there's a physical cause. Just like you can fire a gun, but there's no bullets in the chamber, it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating. This is why skin is so, dermatology is, I contend, like, it's the coolest field, because there are factors, cool. And it is an expression of, who would have thought that what you eat, how you sleep, how you move, who you spend your time with, your past experiences would tell a story on the surface of your skin for all essentially to see, and for yourself. Like, I don't think, we don't have that luxury with other organ systems, but our skin can give us so much information, right? Like, what variable can we change? Where can we get very curious? And I think it's very interesting. Yes, prurigo nodularis is one of, it's really difficult. It is.
Oh, yeah.
Because we typically don't have, good, we can inject steroids into it. We can put, topical anti-itch stuff on it, but it typically doesn't work. So
they don't. I mean, it didn't work for me at all.
Yeah.
Actually, what I did find work over time, and it makes sense, I kind of figured it out, is to use topical anesthetic like lidocaine. Mm-hmm. So it's an indiscriminate suppressor of the sensory organ. So if you shut off the receptors, then it's not going to itch. But it's only temporary. And the downside of it, if it's intense, you rapidly develop tachyphylaxis. So it stops working.
That's the most amazing thing. These are very powerful tools. So you have these C-tactile fibers on your skin, and this is where touch therapy can be very supportive for skin issues, because there's recent research on these sensory fibers that are on our skin that are essentially in communication with parts of our brain that regulate our emotions. And so we can use our hands and use different pressure and different ways of touching the skin to help soothe it, so that you don't necessarily have to contend with some of these medications that have side effects or no longer work, right? The body becomes so used to it with
Mhm.
anaphylaxis. And learning different habits and
Mhm.
understanding what triggers you to want to touch and pick your skin, right? So there are these thoughts, sensations, and emotions that contribute to the chronicity of so many of these conditions.
Yes, the emotional factors can certainly exacerbate it, but these are very powerful physiological reactions. I mean, these oxalates catalyze this cascade of cytokines that just cause intractable itching. I mean, it's chemically mediated. It's not imagined.
No,
Now, emotions can exacerbate it for sure, but it's intense. It's absolutely intense, and I it's just feel so grateful to be liberated from this
yeah, I'm glad
the tyranny of itching. Oh,
that,
it's just extraordinary. It's the biggest physical health problem I've ever had in my life.
which is saying a lot, right?
Yeah,
Saying a
yeah,
lot because
yeah. And I feel so grateful that I was also able to figure it out. And I'm actually going to write a paper, and I will write a case report.
I'm happy
And
to read it.
what's the best journal to submit it to for derm?
Well, our primary journal, like the biggest one, is the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology.
Okay, that's a JAMA journal, is it?
It is not the
Oh, it's not. Okay.
one of the other dermatology journals is a JAMA journal, and I'm blanking on that one because
Probably
it,
the Journal of the Archives of
our
Dermatology.
Archives of Dermatology, yes,
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
JAMA journal. Yeah, and there are plenty of other ones like British Journal of Dermatology. Uh,
okay. I'll figure it out. But this is definitely worth a case report for sure. And in the case report, I'll supply my mechanism of action.
yeah.
And the therapy will be under patent at that time. So I think this patent has global indications and will likely, because it's not just related to oxalate, it's probably related to all cytokine-induced inflammatory conditions. So it has broad implications, like for mosquito bites and bee stings and other things where you would typically apply hydrocortisone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's actually because I've created this, and one of my the chief of my product development team used it for her eczema rash, which the only thing helped was hydrocortisone, and this has relieved it. It's gone. For more than 10 years, it was like 4 or 5 years. It's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. Because their cytokines are really small proteins, but they activate these powerful reflexes in the body and responses.
Yeah.
And if you can abort that reaction with a natural therapy. None of these are chemicals. They're all natural products, which is, I'm biased and prejudiced. I like to avoid all synthetic chemicals, and that includes almost all drugs. Now, there are uses. I tried a lot of drugs for this. I tried. Have you ever used some of the non-traditional antihistamines like cyproheptadine or famotidine,
Mm-hmm.
and gotten results with that? Because those are, well, cyproheptadine will get you sleepy, but famotidine certainly does, and it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Which is Pepsid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we would
Yeah,
use because it's an H2 blocker. We would try and combine the H1 blockers with the H2 blockers to see if we could get people relief. And unfortunately, still, even with that, people were still dying.
yeah, yeah. I tried that, but they didn't work. So if you could treat the cause, it so helps.
Absolutely.
So anything else you'd like to delve into for a bit, or expand on?
Yeah, I think we just come at these things from different angles, and one is
Yeah.
no better or no worse or less or more important. I think you know the big picture is that a holistic approach to
Hmm.
our health, and you start with that one variable and you see how far you can get, and then you add on, you layer on, and you just keep exploring. And I think that's the important thing. But the thing that most people don't want to typically explore is the tough stuff. No one wants to talk about their
Hmm.
feelings, and certainly in my colleagues also, right? Like it can be a Pandora's box if you ask someone, if your dermatologist had really spent the time to understand how this was affecting your life, how
Hmm.
significantly it was affecting your life, the,
Yeah.
their clinic probably would have been derailed. So they probably didn't. I would imagine they didn't spend a ton of time checking in with how this was affecting.
I can agree. Are you recording this in your office or just your home?
My home. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought this was your office, and said, "But you have the traditional counselors there." You're a counselor more than a dermatologist.
I would say that at this stage of my life, I really do function in a coaching and consulting capacity. I spend the majority
Yeah,
of my time with our psychology colleagues because we were not taught this in medical school.
we weren't. Absolutely not. There's no question. So I applaud your efforts and for the commitment and the dedication to identify your passion and then stick with it, because it's not the only way, but it's the most effective way to be successful in anything in life. Because if you're doing it for finance, if you're doing it for anything else other than your passion, you are in for a big surprise at the end because you will never be satisfied.
I think the biggest thing is when our messes become our missions. And for me, when my health fell apart, my
Mhm.
skin was shouting. That's why I named my book The Skin Whisperer, because my skin was shouting. I was completely deaf
Mhm.
to it. I did not, I was like, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. And the benefits come when we can learn to hear what our skin and our body are
I
us when
agree.
they're just a whisper. So
Yeah, that was my journey too, and with the take home I got it because I actually, even though I got the rash 15 years ago, I think the etiology of it was 15 years before then, because my parents, I loved them to death, but they didn't understand nutrition. I was given many processed foods, and half of my mouth was filled with mercury fillings by the time I was in high school, half of my teeth. And when I got shortly after medical school, I had some funds and the opportunity to understand. I didn't understand at the time, but I did, and then that mercury was a toxic poison. It's a neurotoxin. You don't want it in your body. So I wanted to get out as soon as possible, and I went to a dentist who was the elder in the church I was at the time, and I thought he'd be great. And he was a good dentist, but he didn't know anything about biology. That mercury's a toxin. He took it out indiscriminately, and I was poisoned by mercury. And one of the side effects is that it damages your kidney. And I know this is a long story, but it is related. The kidney is the primary excretion of oxalates. So I have damaged kidneys as a result of mercury exposure, which happened 15 years before.
yeah.
And then you put that on top of an oxalate overload and probably destroying my gut bacteria from processed foods like vegetables that I knew were harmful, but didn't realize that they're harmful at very tiny amounts. And it all builds up. And it's not, yeah, I probably had some emotional things. I'm not discounting that, but I think it's interesting how it's a giant puzzle and there's all these pieces as you try to put together. And eventually you do. It took me 15 years to figure it out.
Yeah.
And now I'm at peace with it. Very delighted and grateful that I'll never have this rash again. Never. The rest of my life.
And
I thought I would die with this rash. I really did.
it's so true. It's like this bucket analogy, right?
Mhm.
Like the nutrition, the things that your parents thought they were doing a good job, but
Oh yeah, they weren't.
it
They
just
weren't. Yeah, they were
then the
mean.
bucket gets so heavy, and so just being able to poke holes and just let some of
Yeah.
the weight out, and then from your own experience, being able to pay it forward. And I feel
Mhm.
that's my opportunity and obligation in many ways too, is to pay forward the learnings that I acquired through a lot of hard, kind of crappy stuff. And we just don't want other people suffering that way.
No, no, not at all. Well, thank you so much for joining us, for your commitment, your dedication, and spreading the message that you're passionate about, because that's when you're most effective. And I'm sure you're doing a fantastic job with all the people you take care of.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.